Good afternoon, everyone, to another exciting episode of BWHR Voices. Today we have with us Mr. Vidya Sagar Gannamani, Chairman and Managing Director, Adecco India. We welcome you, sir. It's a pleasure for us to be speaking with you.
Thank you very much, Sugan. I'm looking forward to this session.
Thank you so much, sir. So, for people who do not know what we'll be discussing today, our topic of discussion today is addressing implementation of POSH provisions at workplace. Just a small introduction and an understanding of what exactly POSH is. So, POSH stands for Prevention of Sexual Harassment, which is a critical issue that needs to be addressed at workplaces today. It is essential to create a safe and respectable work environment for all employees, regardless of gender, and to ensure that they feel comfortable and empowered to report any incidents of harassment. Now, implementation in itself is a bigger game when it comes to, provisions of POSH. Not many employees in an organization are aware of what exactly the guidelines are of POSH and how can they report issues. So implementation of POSH provisions at workplaces, they require a comprehensive approach that involves developing an anti-harassment policy, conducting regular training sessions, setting up a POSH committee, providing support to victims, and mentoring and evaluating the policy. Mr. Vidya Sagar, my first question to you: what, according to you, are some of the challenges faced by workplaces in implementing POSH provisions? So, POSH isn't anything new, as I've just explained, but not many employees still today are aware of what exactly is POSH. So, what are some of those challenges that are faced by committees in terms of implementing POSH provisions?
Yeah, Sugan, let's start with some of the basics, right? I think as often with many new programs or programs which have not been highlighted well enough in the past, lack of awareness is one of the biggest challenges that you see, and that's one of the most common, but also the most widely present and the challenge that actually could derail this entire effort. So lack of awareness, and then it becomes imperative on how the organization can address this, how that we can address it with the rank and file of the organization, but equally also with the managers in the organization to drive awareness amongst our employees. That's the first one. There are a few other challenges that I will just go through, but just to list them out upfront. It's resistance to change. That's a big one. A fear of retaliation. Another one. Limited resources to actually implement an effective POSH program. There are biases and stereotypes that every one of us harbors within ourselves, and then how do you address these in the context of POSH? And last but not the least, inadequate monitoring and evaluation of the policies and the entire POSH program itself. So maybe just to elaborate on a few of these things, I already started about awareness. I think many workplaces across the country don't spend enough time and effort to raise this awareness, both amongst managers and employees. And these can be simple things, right? These can be around how leadership and management talks about POSH and how it effectively communicates about them at town halls during regular employee connects, but also in a very visual and a demonstrable way with posters in the organization, etc. Just raising awareness about POSH, I think, is key to making this entire the implementation of POSH successful.
Okay.
With the implementation of POSH and the processes that come with it, there's a resistance to change. Yeah? Some people see it as unnecessary, some of them see it as intrusive, or they see it as an additional burden to themselves on their regular work. So I think that resistance to change is also something that needs to be addressed.
Okay.
Now, the third piece which I spoke about was around fear of retaliation, and it's also a barrier that needs to be crossed because there are many employees who believe that complaints on these topics may lead to retaliation from their colleagues and their superiors and their peers, etc. So here again, I think it's incumbent on the organization to ensure that there is a proper mechanism in place so that we don't undermine the effectiveness of this entire program.
All right.
To cope with these things, of course, you need strong resources. You need to make sure that the culture that you have in the organization does not support stereotyping of people or puts an emphasis on the wrong type of biases. So I think these are things that we as organizations need to take care of. So then,
Fair enough. So, any anecdotes that you could share from your own organization while, could be anything, could be how your employees reported certain issues or how comfortable they feel of the implementation of POSH policies within your own organization. So, any anecdote that you could share with us, which makes people even more clear as to what is. I mean, there aren't always negative repercussions of reporting a case. There might be two or three or a group of employees who are facing a similar issue, but then only one had the courage to report it, but the rest also got benefited from it. So it is not just that you have to stand for yourself, you actually need to stand for a whole bunch of people that might be facing same issues.
what I would like to share, it's not an anecdote, but what I would like to share is how do you address these things, right? How do you give people the
Hmm.
confidence that when they come forward with an issue, it's going to be treated at the right level with the right level of confidentiality, but also the
Hmm.
right level of judgment around the case that has been brought forward. So I think within Adecco India itself, for example, the POSH committee is oftentimes or always constituted with people right at the top of the company. So we
Okay.
have people of the management team who are part of this committee. We make sure that they are very well trained in the procedures around um, the POSH committee and the processes thereof, and also ensuring that there's a good balance of gender in this POSH committee to make sure that it's a balanced view that's always put across, and there's a good and a fair judgment of the case itself. So I think and establishing the credibility of the process through the work that they do, the decisions that they reach, but also the consequences that are then rolled out when there is something found. I think it forms the basis of any effective um, POSH policy in an organization. And I'm pretty
Okay.
proud of the fact that we have a very strong committee led by our leaders,
Mhm.
populated with some of our senior women leaders who actually take this as a serious part of their role in the organization. So
No,
then,
that's very kind of your management to be actually vigilant and generous towards a strong issue like this. So, how, in your view, can workplaces monitor and assess the effectiveness of POSH implementation? Now, you might be, aware in the back of your mind that we've given a proper podium for our employees to come forward and keep their issues. But how can you monitor it that how effective it is proving out to for all the employees?
couple of things, right? So always when somebody comes forth with a complaint, it already means you're being reactive. Yeah, so one of the conversations we have with both our own leadership within our leadership team, but with the wider group of managers is to keep an eye out and to make sure that they're sensitive to what's happening in the organization within their teams and be confident and comfortable enough to identify when things they see are happening, which they
Mm-hmm.
know go against the principles of what it is to have a safe environment for our employees, and bring that to the attention of us as leaders so that we don't let things deteriorate to a situation where an employee has to go through an event to then come and report it. I think it's incumbent on managers and leaders of any organization to ensure that they have their antennas up and out there, to ensure that they any sense any situation or environment which could
Hmm.
lead to these kind of situations. So I think that's something which is a key role of any leadership team or manager in an organization, and I think that's something that I strongly believe in.
Fair enough. And what could be some of the legal consequences then workplaces face for non-compliance of POSH provisions specifically?
Sorry, Sugan, can you repeat the question?
So I mean to ask, what are the legal consequences that workplaces can face for non-compliance with POSH provisions? Now that we know how important it is to have POSH policies within organizations, so what according to you could be some of the legal consequences if the organizations face for the non-compliance of POSH provisions?
I think there are a few things, right? So the way I look at it is, one is the actual legal responsibilities, and the second is the moral responsibilities. Okay, so let me start with the moral responsibilities first. I think as an organization, I think all of us are, we as leaders are entrusted with making sure that there's an environment where people can work without fear or prejudice. And I think not providing that environment and having these cases can lead to substantial reputational damage. And I think it's just basics, right? If you have an organization where people are not treated fairly or women are treated poorly, I think the question automatically becomes, do people consider it an organization where good things happen, or where it's safe for them to send their sisters or their daughters or their mothers here to work? So I think there's always a human element to it, which drives the reputational damage. That's the primary thing I think that we should all be concerned with. But of course, when things go wrong, there are penalties, there are civic liabilities, there are criminal liabilities. So I think the second half, which are the penalties and the liabilities, etc., both civil and criminal, are quite stringent, and they are well defined within the government regulations, and they can range all the way from fines of 50,000 rupees to a lakh of rupees, depending on the number of violations. It can lead to compensatory damages. It can lead to, for example, criminal charges. So I think the list is endless around what can really happen when things go wrong. But more importantly, I always say it's our moral responsibility to ensure that we provide a safe space for women to work, and not doing so leads to a reputational damage, which is, I think, the most significant damage any organization can suffer in society.
And also, I want the viewers also who are listening to make it pretty clear that, POSH implementations do not only rely on or work towards policies towards women's safety, because it is a gender specific issue. It's not in consideration to a female issue or a male issue. As much as a female can get harassed, so can a male be. So
You're
basically,
absolutely
the
right.
provisions behind implementing POSH at workplaces is for the employees to feel safe. Both the genders should feel safe in a way, one, that their issues are pretty confidential, and two, they can rely on the management that yes, their issue will be addressed. So there will not be any scope of favoritism. Let's say if he or she is a leader, or if he or she is a TL or a manager, and then an employee might think that no action will be taken against, considering he or she is from a senior leadership level. Well, that isn't the case. Companies are pretty vigilant towards uh, taking steps toward making employees feel safe, and it is more so to do with employees coming back to work after COVID specifically. So, sir, any list of key takeaways that you would want to give out to your viewers that they should always keep in mind whenever talking about or discussing about POSH implementations?
No, so again, to me, I think I go back to the basics around it, right? I think, first of all, it's about making sure that we conduct regular trainings in the organization, which raises the awareness of this entire topic. Yeah? I think those trainings should also give great clarity about the process this whole thing follows. What happens when there's a complaint? Who is sitting on those committees? How are those assessments done? How are those reports given out to people? How do we ensure confidentiality in that entire process? I think by being transparent about this process, and also by being transparent about the leaders who are on those committees, you raise both awareness but also confidence in the process, so people feel more secure to come forward and make these make these complaints if it comes to that. I think that to me is a core element of making sure that this whole thing comes to life in an organization. So then it's about clear raising of awareness through making people aware of in detail of the process that is followed when there's a complaint. I think that lies at the heart of everything.
And an effective implementation. So companies who are still, in the phase of making their policies, considering, their startups, or they're at a very nascent stage, and they might think that, POSH is not something that, we should be implementing, considering we do have a handful of people working with us. Well, that's not the case. It is actually basis the safety of your employees. So if you have 10 employees or you have hundreds of employees, the implementation of POSH as a policy within an organizational framework is pretty important. Thank you so much, Mr. Vidya Sagar, today. You've given us some immense knowledgeable insights as well as key points to always consider. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your valuable thoughts. It was a pleasure for us to be speaking with you.
Thanks for having me, Sugan. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much, sir.